My ex walked out on me when I was 7 months pregnant, leaving me to raise our son alone. But now, 2 years later, he shows up out of nowhere demanding to be a father. We got along well, and he was attractive and sweet. I didn't mind because it allowed us to save money, but I did think that he was a little too fussy about money, which occasionally came across as stingy. That was my one criticism of him. I didn't overthink it. Therefore, I'm sure he might have a lot of issues with me as well, but since he never brought it up, I didn't see the need for me to bring it up with him. Not to exaggerate, but he was always looking for methods to reduce expenses and save money, so his stinginess was a little out of control. Before I moved in with him and discovered that everything in his house was quite cheap and of extremely low quality, it wasn't an issue for me. Whether it was food, toiletries, or even furniture, all of it was used and appeared to have seen better days. I used to hang out with him in my flat and occasionally at his before moving in together, but I never paid any attention to it. However, I eventually broke my apartment's lease since it was simply more convenient to move in with Travis and the rent was much too exorbitant. After moving in with him, I started to notice these things and attempted to ignore them for a while before realizing that I couldn't hold my tongue for very long. Eventually, I made the decision to speak with him about it. At first, he objected, but I was able to persuade him to buy new items for his home. After wearing him down, I reassured him that it would be beneficial for us both in the long run, like an investment, and that we would split the costs equally, which seemed to appease him. That's what we actually did, and before I knew it, after moving in with him for only 3 months, I had completely renovated the house and made it look much nicer after getting rid of everything he had previously owned. I believed that I was being helpful to him and that it would benefit us both, but it doesn't seem to be the case. I suppose that's when things started to go south in our relationship because he felt like I was being very controlling and selfish, even though all I was doing was trying to make his life better. Furthermore, I wasn't doing anything for personal gain. He continued to bring it up, even though I felt it was a little unfair for him to say things like that, and I would become really irritated with him anytime he did. He used to remind me that he had practically altered his entire lifestyle for my comfort and benefit every time we got into a quarrel, so it was kind of his trump card that had to put an end to my arguments. Since I had also paid for the items we had bought, I didn't think that was cool. Therefore, it wasn't as though he would cover all expenses. In addition, we were sharing the rent. We now shared ownership of this house, and I saw no problem with attempting to make it livable for me as well. However, he refused to hear any of that and insisted that he had completely transformed his life for me, and I suppose I should have been appreciative of that. I never argued with him as a result. Despite that, we stayed together because I believed that we could work things out. After we moved in together, things had been a little hard, but I felt they might work things out eventually, so I chose to stick by him. When things were going well, they really were wonderful, so I didn't want to give up on us too soon because of a few arguments. Furthermore, I'm not the type of person who gives up on relationships quickly. That concluded things. We still argued and worked things out, but neither of us ever considered ending things. I suppose he was as interested in working things out with me as I was, but perhaps that changed once I became aware of my pregnancy. We were both ecstatic, and he promised to marry me as soon as he received the promotion he had been aiming for. Since I genuinely wanted to marry Travis, I was rather pleased about it. We had a few conversations about marriage because I loved him, and the baby would only make us closer, but he never made an official proposal with a ring or anything. Although it was all informal, we had both agreed that eventually, when the moment was appropriate, it would happen. He had been putting in the time at work for several months, and all he was waiting for was a promotion. We would formally get engaged and begin wedding preparations as soon as he received a raise. That was the strategy we had decided upon together, and I think we would still get married even if he didn't get the promotion. However, that was really foolish of me. I made the decision to take a break from work when I was 3 months pregnant because I needed less stress in my life, and my job was simply becoming too demanding. Being a contractor, to put it mildly, is an extremely physically demanding job. Since things were becoming really tough for me, I made the decision to take a maternity leave. Unfortunately, I had only been working for the company for a few months when I started, and employees who have worked there for less than a year are not really eligible for financial assistance during maternity leave. That meant that until I returned to work, I would not be paid. Travis assured me that he would take care of everything, so I didn't need to worry. When we spoke about this, I informed him that although I would continue to help and support him in any way I could, I would not be able to share the rent as it was my largest outlay of funds. I also had to watch how much money I spent before the kid was born because there would be a lot of things to consider when the baby was delivered. It was determined that he would pay the rent totally on his own until I returned to work, and I was okay with that. After 2 months, everything was going smoothly. He was still hoping for a promotion, but one day he just came home crying and told me that he had not received the promotion he had been expecting and that someone else had. It would be an understatement to say that he was sad, since the following few weeks were dreadful for both of us. It was clear that he was furious about what had happened and had started drinking, but he wasn't even bothered enough to hide it. I would be on edge the entire time because I didn't want anything awful to happen to him when he would come home from work and just start drinking like there was no tomorrow. I attempted to get him to cut back on the alcohol, but he told me there was no reason he should stop as long as it wasn't hurting anyone. I didn't even have the energy to dispute with him and try to make him understand that I was pregnant and tired all the time. I didn't want to waste my time attempting to talk to him because he was also just very unpleasant and irritated all the time. It only continued getting worse, even though I assumed he would eventually move over it. Approximately when I was 5 months pregnant, even though he started to drink less, he was still quite irritated and would become angry with me if I tried to talk to him. I didn't end our relationship because I continued to have faith that we would eventually be together and that he would get over this phase. In addition, my parents were in a different city and I was 5 months pregnant, so I would be stuck there if I broke up with him. Furthermore, I didn't want to burden any of my friends. I reasoned that since I was going to give birth to this man soon, I would just have to put up with it for a while before things improved. However, one day he just returned from work and told me that we had to start dividing the rent again evenly because he would no longer be able to pay for all of the bills on his own and wouldn't be able to get paid more than what he was earning due to the rejection of the promotion. That worried me a lot because I had already decided to take a break, and at that point I was pretty large and easily weary. I therefore couldn't possibly return to work at that point. I attempted to reassure him that I would return to work in 2 months so he could just wait it out. However, he informed me that he was no longer able to tell me about this, even though he had been waiting for a while to do so. He added that he would need me to resume making rent contributions because it was getting increasingly difficult for him to handle all of the household costs on his own. I assumed it was a joke or something, since there was no way he was going to ask a pregnant woman who was 7 months along, with his unborn child no less, to return to work in order to save $1,000 or so on expenses. We had talked about this earlier, and he had assured me that he would take care of everything. I wasn't even asking him to take care of everything and pay for all the expenses, just the rent. So I attempted to tell him that he was being really unfair. I was still paying the other expenses and my share of the groceries. It's not like I was totally reliant on him. However, he was unwilling to back down from his demands, and at one point, he threatened to have me vacate his flat if I didn't start paying the rent on time instead of coming up with excuses. I found that to be really offensive, as we had assumed that this would be our permanent residence when we moved in together. I had also always thought of the flat as our home, even if the lease was in his name. I didn't even know what to say to him when he threatened to kick me out of the flat if I didn't pay the rent while I was pregnant. I advised him to cool down and consider it rationally, but he insisted that his decision had already been made and that there was nothing I could do to alter it. I had to face that fact immediately and make my own choices. That day, I became so angry that I yelled at him, starting the battle of the century. After about 30 minutes of yelling at each other, I gave up and began collecting my belongings since I was so exhausted. He had again mentioned how he had altered everything for me and how unfair it was of me to expect so much from him while giving him nothing in return. I was embarrassed by the way he had treated me. It was disrespectful beyond belief that he thought I had done nothing for him. I couldn't handle the fact that he was saying such things to me because I loved him, therefore it was upsetting for me. I then moved in with a friend after packing my belongings. I couldn't tell her what had happened, but I also didn't want to burden her. I tried not to cry as I tried to explain the issue to her, but I was so emotionally wrecked that I ended up crying worse than before. Following that altercation, my friend Bana was gracious enough to assure me that she would not suffer for me and that I could stay with her for as long as I needed to without having to pay rent. I knew her from our time together as roommates in college. I knew she was a wonderful person. However, throughout our shared residence, she went above and beyond my expectations, taking care of me in ways that Travis couldn't have even imagined. My OB/GYN would always be too busy, so I would have to go to all of our appointments alone before I moved in with her. However, Bana made sure I didn't have to do any of it by myself, and she supported me the entire time, even during my labor. In the 2 weeks preceding my due date, she also graciously permitted my parents to come see me every day. I can't think of anyone else who would have been so open to us with her home and heart. We've been close ever since, and I agree with my parents when they call her the sister I never had. She truly is my sister, which is something I never had. When I returned to Travis after I left, he was hardly there at all for me. We never ended our relationship officially, but for weeks after I stormed out of the house that day, I waited for him to call and ask me to return. However, that call never materialized. Rather, he blocked me everywhere along with everybody we had in common. He made it quite clear to me that he didn't want to talk to me, and I'm not sure why he felt the need to go to such lengths. I was unable to contact him, not even on the day I went into labor. I therefore chose to give his parents a call because I hadn't spoken to Travis and his parents hadn't gotten in touch with me following our major argument, despite the fact that they had been checking in on me every other week prior. I wasn't even sure if they knew about the breakup. However, I reasoned that since they ought to know, perhaps they would also inform Travis. I thus gave them a call to let them know which hospital I would be visiting. I told his mom that I was going into labor, but no one from their family answered the phone. I didn't say much and I didn't know what to anticipate. It sounded like she didn't care, and when no one appeared, I discovered that in reality, neither her husband nor she did, and not Travis by any means. I'm thankful that my parents and Brianna were there for me when I gave birth to my child. Even though I don't need Travis anymore, but that's how I feel right now. Things were very different then, though. I was quite sad that Travis had not attended the birth of his own baby. I made an effort to remain composed, understanding that there would be no turning back now. I was well aware that I would have to raise my child alone, and I could see that Travis could not possibly care less about his child. After I came home from the hospital, I sobbed uncontrollably, but I also made the decision to see a lawyer to ensure that Travis renounced his parental rights. Because if he hadn't even shown enough to support the birth of his son, he had no business remaining in our lives. I was going to be the only one to care for my son and myself. My parents and Brianna supported my decision. When I told them about it, they made the decision to begin corresponding with solicitors who handled cases similar to this. After selecting one, we asked him to draft the necessary documents, and about a week after I gave birth to our child, I personally paid Travis a visit with my lawyer to persuade him to sign away his rights. Then everything would come to an end. There wasn't much to discuss. I explained to him the purpose of the papers and offered him a simple solution. He could sign away his rights, and we would be done if he chose not to be involved in his son's life. It was a really simple process, and we finished it quickly. I was heartbroken because that was the last time I saw him. However, I was aware that in the long term, it was essential for my son and myself. That would be the best course of action. Travis was not going to do the same to my son, even though I knew he was erratic and had let me down, breaking my heart. After he signed those documents, he was no longer a parent. There was no turning back after that. My son and I were the only ones left, since I no longer wanted to be in contact with Travis. I didn't demand child support from him. I was aware of his extreme frugal nature, which is why he would compose an entire song and dance about it if I made a child support request. I therefore had to put in a lot of work to support my son and myself. Again, Brianna was a huge supporter of mine. Only a few months after my son's birth, I returned to work and had to take money out of my savings to help pay for living expenses so that Brianna and I could divide everything equally. She never asked for it, but I wanted to be useful because I felt terrible living with her for free, even though she was simply an employee earning roughly the same as me and taking care of my son and myself without any issues. In order to relocate here and be nearer to me, my parents made the decision to rent out the property in our hometown. It was a bit pricey because rent was somewhat more in this area, but they were able to find a flat near Bona. They invited me to move in with them, but surprisingly, Brianna requested me not to because she liked our home and had grown close to both my son and myself. We chose to remain together. When Brianna and I were at work, my parents would watch my son, and everything was perfect. I entirely forgot about Travis for a few months as I became preoccupied with work and raising my son, and that actually aided in my healing and moving on process. Surprisingly, it didn't even bother me or make me feel anything when I heard from a few of my friends, when my baby was approximately 8 months old, that Travis was back to seeing other people. I broke up with Travis 2 years ago, and being a single mother has been amazing. If nothing else, it's better than living with someone who doesn't care about me enough, or who didn't even try to support his son and myself. A few months ago, I moved into a flat of my own. I'm not sure if Brianna's new boyfriend would be okay with this arrangement, even though it was really stressful for both of us and she started seeing someone else. Even still, our time together is limited since all good things eventually come to an end. Thus, a few months ago, I moved out. Every weekend, she and my parents come see me, and we make a big deal out of it. I'm happy with my life and don't miss Travis at all, but about a week ago, Travis knocked on my door and declared that he was ready to move on from me. He explained that he had gotten my address from a friend and that, following much thought and several unsuccessful dates, he had come to the conclusion that he had made a grave error and wanted me back. In addition, he desired a bond with his son, so he had returned. I informed him he was no longer wanted in my life and believed it was absurd of him to think that I would just take him back with no questions asked. When I attempted to close the door, he informed me that he would not be leaving until he had a chance to see his son. He had not even had the chance to see his own son since he was born, and he told me that it was really unjust that I was keeping his own child away from him. Now that 2 years have passed, he merits at least one meeting with the boy. He told me that if I was a good mother, I would do what was right for my son and not attempt to get even with him by keeping our son from him. He was ready to be a father now. First of all, I had confirmation that he had renounced his parental rights. Therefore, I found it hilarious. As a result, he was no longer legally his son's father and could not demand to see him. He didn't interact with us at all for 2 years. Therefore, it was quite audacious of him to abruptly return and assume that we would accept it. I merely laughed in his face, reminding him that not long after our baby was born, he had signed away his rights. He was no longer our son's father. Instead, he was just my son's father, and he had to leave. If not, I would call the police and report him. After that, I closed the door in his face and pretended not to notice him while he rang the doorbell for about 5 minutes until he eventually went away. Now that I've talked to Brianna and my parents about it, I feel terrible. They concur that I don't need to see Travis again, but they're not sure whether this is what's best for our son. The fact that Travis's parents have been attempting to contact me ever since I drove him away is another issue. They've been sobbing and pleading with me to give Travis another chance at being a parent and to give him a chance to make everything right. They apologized in a ton of messages they sent me for their actions 2 years ago and for not being there for me. They clarified that they were only angry that Travis and I had broken up and that they were also struggling with a lot of personal problems, which caused them to make some poor choices. However, they have now expressed genuine regret and have returned to rationality. They're attempting to persuade me that my son will eventually want to know about his father, so this is what's best for him. Furthermore, if I inform him that his father had desired to return, but I made the decision that he would not be involved in his life, they're only trying to stop my son from being extremely disappointed. They realize that Travis made a huge mistake, but I should forgive him as a mother since my son needs him. Travis is attempting to persuade me of the same things and has also unblocked me. In addition, he's making an effort to convince me that we genuinely fit together. He is aware of my current anger, but is prepared to wait for me and understands that I will ultimately change. I simply cannot decide what to do. This is a major conundrum in my opinion, and it's now driving me crazy. I was upset because I didn't want to see our son with my ex-boyfriend who broke up with me when I was pregnant. Update: after giving it some thought, I've decided not to let Travis back into my life and, at the very least, not to give him any contact with my son. At least not until he's old enough to understand what occurred. When he's 5 years old, I'll tell him about his father, and at that point, he can make up his own mind. I told Travis that even though I know he's still young and not old enough, and he seemed to be cool with it. Thus, for the time being, that is the conclusion we have reached. Whether it sticks or not, we'll see. Regarding everyone who is accusing me of being horrible for preventing my son from seeing his father in the comments, let me say this: we can all call it even since his father didn't even support me at the birth of our baby. I also value the other folks who have shown me kindness and support and haven't passed judgment on me too harshly. You all need to take a moment to reflect. Update 2, it has been around 2 days since I spoke with Travis, but his parents are not pleased. They consider 5 years to be a very long time and believe it is unhealthy for a son to be cut off from his father for that length of time. They didn't appear to have an issue when I was in delivery, and none of them cared to show up, so I find it amusing that they're having trouble with it now. If it came down to it, Travis advised me to block his parents and ignore them. However, the things they have been accusing me of are seriously flawed. They believe that I intentionally sabotaged Travis's relationship with his son in order to exact revenge, as if I were small-minded enough to keep my son from my former partner just to hurt his feelings. They believe that because I clearly don't care about my son, I'm sufficiently self-centered to do it. It's not what I say. I wanted to respond to them when they stated this, but opted against it because it was definitely not worth it. I won't waste my time attempting to reason with his parents because they are old, insane, and dramatic. They are free to hold any beliefs they choose. It doesn't concern me. Update 3. Hello. It's been about a month since I last spoke with Travis, and we've determined that he will help pay for his son's costs and make an effort to be a good father. It will be very challenging for us to co-parent if we don't continue to work on developing our trust. We're taking things slowly right now, but I might introduce him to our son this year. Thus far, he has shown me a great deal of remorse and has expressed his desire to find a way to make up for all he did. I'm prepared to give him an opportunity. I also gave it some thought. I've been pushing myself to be better for my son and putting myself through a lot. However, Travis is voluntarily offering to assist me here. I therefore have no grounds to refuse his assistance. Whatever happens, I'm going to give this a shot for my son.